Welcome to a special edition of that Millwall podcast, I suppose, the only way to describe it. We are lucky enough to be an interview with a ex-Premiership scout for many years, also a Millwall fan. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mickey. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Nice to meet you. Obviously, joining me on this show is my regular partner in crime, my co-host, the one and only Omar. How you doing, fella?
Not bad, thank you. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. So, hopefully, over this show, we're going to answer some questions. We're going to get some answers to some questions, and hopefully get a better insight into youth setup, scouting players, potentially what goes into finding a player to sign a player. And questions along those lines. So we're going to be back straight after this and we'll get straight in. So see you in a minute. Welcome back. Okay. So Jim, probably best to start with, you don't have to mention names, you can just say the leagues, but unless you want to mention names, it's up to you. But give us a little bit of your CV as such.
Well, the CV started really, I was in the army for 17 years, got out in the army in 93, I lived in just outside Chester, and I was doing my badges as I was going through after leaving the army, and I ended up as a football coach really, and it was through coaching and management I eventually got into scouting, but I was head of youth at Chester City for 3 or 4 years. I managed a team in the League of Wales. I then went out to Hong Kong for 10 years to work as a director of sport and a football coach. And when I came back, I was looking for a role in football that had no responsibility really, or no pressure and no responsibility. So I ended up with a friend of mine at a professional club who said there was a vacancy. I talked to them and I sort of fitted the brief for what they were looking for as a scout. So my background really is in coaching and managing, and it's youth development as well. So it fits very well to youth scouting and looking at young players rather than going looking for a senior player for a senior team, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So I suppose with what you've just told us, we start at the beginning and we can work through, because some of what you said you've done is set little bulbs off in my head to come along a path. So you say youth development, and obviously, where does that differ between where you said Chesterfield and say the Premiership you were where does development start, or is it the same level in both those clubs, or does one differ to the other?
I think if you look in, I mean, a lot of people look at under 7s, under 6s, under 8s, that sort of area. And there's not a lot of difference. All there is the name and the funding, if you like. I know some of the top clubs will fund their development process. It's a development phase that allows kids to get up to under 12, and they'll get funded through different environments. The smaller clubs, when I was at Chester City, had no money. They couldn't, if you like, the first team took all the money. Everything else underneath that was scrapping around for whatever they could get. We had sponsors, we had parents all buying stuff, that matter. So smaller clubs don't have the access, or they have access to local kids because of the time constraints. If you go to, whether it's Man City, whether it's Arsenal, whether it's Millwall, they've got to live within an hour and a half of the training ground to be able to get there. So Manchester City couldn't pick a player up from Birmingham and keep flying him back and forth because he doesn't live within that area. So they'll get the best kids. The Premier League teams will get the best kids because their scouting network is bigger. They'll attract the best kids in the area. But if you're going into London, you look at all the clubs in London that are all looking for the same kids. And Millwall, they're not fighting Arsenal, Tottenham, and the bigger boys. They're fighting Orients, Charltons, those sort of clubs to get the best of the rest. And then that's where the coaching side comes in. If you're looking at the coaches, then they've got to be a certain level. It's whether they can develop the players to their potential, so they eventually get through to 16, get their scholarship or apprenticeship, YT, whatever you want to call it. That's where the real sort of professional football then comes into play. So up to 16, you're looking at players. You might find that you might have somebody who recommends somebody. Somebody might ring up, send a letter in, and it's up to really the recruitment people to say, we'll have a look at him or we won't look at him. You know, he's no interest to us, but it's a certain criteria that you would like. I think that anybody writing into somewhere like Millwall or ringing up and saying, I know a player, that Millwall would take a look at him.
Right, I've got you. And I suppose really with the Prem clubs they're probably a lot more picky on using their own networks to look at certain players rather than just having I'm not saying there isn't a few little gems out there what they probably missed, but I suppose a lot of it would come from football coaches and people with contacts in the games what will then sit there and say, actually, you want to be looking at this kid. He's only 9 at the minute, but potential. Because I suppose the difference in development between 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old to when they're at 16, they could be, they might not grow. They might grow slightly later. They might not put weight on. So it's a huge gamble from picking a kid at 6, 7, 8 than it would be probably picking a kid at 14, 15, 16. But then by the time you look at 14, 15, 16, they might have bad habits on a coaching level, would they?
Oh, yeah. There's when you're looking at the younger children, they can't sign contracts. So you can't have a 7 and 8-year-old contracted to your club. So they still play grassroots football. They'll play development football, foundation football, I think it's called, where they'll get to 11 years old or 10 years old. And at that point, they can then join a professional academy. So Millwall could pick up a player at 10 years old, sign him to I think it's a 1 or 2 year. It's not a deal. It's just a contract that's saying, they're going to support him. They're going to make sure that he gets all the advice that you'd expect from a professional club. He then can't play for his grassroots club a lot of the time because it defeats the object. If they're getting information from the grassroots club coming into, I'll say Millwall, if they're coming into Millwall, getting different information from the coaches, being asked to do different things, it then causes complications for the child. And the one thing I'd say, and I've always said it whenever I've been involved in professional football, once a child gets into professional football, a professional football club, for me, it's very easy for that enjoyment to go. And they just see it as a chore because all that'll happen for the next 5, 6 years or until they're 18. Every day they're getting assessed. Every day they're getting judged. They're getting looked at by people. And it could be that, they play 30 great games a season and they might have 2 bad games. And those 2 bad games are what they'll end up getting assessed on a lot of the time if the wrong people are watching them. So for me, it's not a great environment, but it's a lot better now because the bigger clubs make it better. They see their own responsibilities. And I know Millwall do that. They actually recognise that there's a responsibility to increase the personality of the child as well. So hopefully, you don't see the kids who fall away and are left on their own and, it suddenly becomes a life problem to them rather than, all it is a game of football.
Jim, I just thought maybe to touch on the EPPP program. Is it the Elite Player Performance Plan? I think that was brought in, wasn't it? I think in 2011 or 12.
It's Howard Wilkinson who sort of set it up.
Yeah, and I was wondering, from your experience, obviously, of working in football and scouting, and obviously the youth side, is it something that you think it's is it a good structure? Would you say? Are you for the structure to change, or how would you kind of look at it yourself from your experiences?
For me, and I've been on both sides of it. Funny enough, where as a coach or a head of youth or the youth development guy, it's a great thing to make sure that the standards, it sets standards across it. What doesn't tend to get recognised too often, you've got 3 different categories of academies. So you've got the category ones, which are the Man Cities, the Man Uniteds, Liverpools, Arsenals, and they are top drawer. The facilities are fantastic. The kids want for nothing. The parents never have to put their hand in the pockets, if you like, in terms of providing kit. Then you go down to category 3. Category 2 is good. I mean, category 2 is generally a good level. They're just under the Premier League class, but they're better than the category 3. So I think Millwall category 2, places like Crewe, Coventry, they're a good level. but again, their funding isn't as much. So the likes of Crystal Palace and the big boys, they'll be putting millions into it. Millwall won't be putting millions. They'll get a grant from the Premier League, from the Football League, and they might put some money from their own budget into it. So there's a certain level. Then you get to Category 3, and generally they're the ones that the Category 1s and the Category 2s are looking at Category 3 players because they are the best kids generally in their area. But those best kids are already been nicked by the big boys. But there might be a late developer. There might be a kid who comes out of nowhere. And as an example, last 2 years ago, one of the clubs I was going to watch had a 16-year-old boy turned up. He'd flown in, or his parents had moved to the area from Belgium. This kid turned up at the local club, professional club, said, I've been playing in Belgium. I'm a striker. Could I have a trial? And within 10 minutes, they'd signed him. He was fantastic, and he's the one that, if you like, the Category 3s are desperate to get. But at the end of that, it's the Category 1s who are going to come and nick him from the Category 3s. So the EPPP is great for putting structures in place, putting standards in place, and ensuring that there's a certain level of quality given, even at Category 3, to young players. What it's not good at, in my mind, the poor thing is a compensation side of things, where there is a certain level, but it's nowhere near. And I know, as much as Millwall have lost players to City over the last few years, but I know within those areas, Man City are one of the few clubs will pay over the odds rather than go to a tribunal. They would rather give more, so they keep a relationship with a club, and
for future business,
for the future, and it works. And even though the two players they bought have moved on,
yeah,
I've got a feeling, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that there is a knock-on effect that where Millwall will claw some money back on there. It's the big clubs have the ability to do that.
That was my next question, obviously, with regards to the compensation payments. But I think the player in question, was Edazozi, who I saw is potentially linked with Germany. So, but then is that so? With that, obviously, and you're saying obviously the clubs dealing with it between themselves, it's a lot better that way than going through a tribunal process, I guess, because that's when it can get a bit messy at times and can kind of then lead to issues down the line, I suppose, with what fees actually paid and what's deemed appropriate.
Well, the tribunals they're very black and white, very fact driven. Whereas if you've got a guy, and I'll use Man City as an example with Edozie, with Giabi, what happens there is that they'll talk to the people. So the head guy at Man City will talk to the head guy at Millwall in terms of the academies, and they'll try and come to a figure that's reasonable. And it might be, I don't know, I think did they pay something like $1 million for Edozie or something like that? They paid
supposedly, yeah,
with everything built in. It was something around that. But then if he does get flogged on for 10 million to Germany, then there's a chance he'll get, the club will get more money back from that. Mm-hmm. And it's a much better system. If he goes to a tribunal, they might get up 500,000, 400,000, which is peanuts in terms of what they should get.
Sure.
Yeah, because I think they got add-ons and everything else, because you can, if you're doing a deal yourself, you'll get a fee, and then you can add, if they do this, especially if they play for England and stuff like that, you can put this on and put that on and everything else, which we come on to some of the clauses at a later point. One of the things what I am interested in is that with what you've just said there, and I just summarise to a degree. So basically the level 3 clubs, they're looking for a player to invest, for as an investment for them to be able to sell at a profit at a later point, as in the stage 1s are just looking at mass players and hoping that they find a gem within them.
Yeah, I think
the level 3 can't have that ability to have like 100 kids in. They have to find that golden egg as such and hope that that they develop, they can produce into a player where potentially they can get money going forward to reinvest into the club. But obviously the pro clubs don't.
A lot of the issue with, a Category 3 academy could have 200 under 10 players, the unfortunate thing there is somebody's got to pay for the coaching, and Category 3 clubs don't generally have that sort of funding.
Yeah.
So is it worth their while putting 20 coaches in to work with 200 players? Or is it better just having one group of 16, 18 players with 1 or 2 coaches, hoping that they'll get the best in their area? So they're going to get the best kids that live within the hour. They're hoping for. If they live in a city, they're really struggling because, I think Manchester, you can go to Bury and Salford and places like that. London, you're really stuck, aren't you? Because, you can get anywhere in London within an hour or hour and a half. So, for teams like Millwall or clubs like Millwall, to find a gem is all down to their scouting network. So what they've got to, in my mind, what they would need to do is have a hub and work out from that hub. So they have contacts, they have school teachers, they have, South London with the coaches, everybody that's working in that environment should be able to feed the best kids into Millwall. They don't.
So this new training facility, what's being talked about within Sevenoaks, obviously next to Brands Hatch, potentially this is a massive gold mine for Millwall, because what they're going to do is they're going to they can go in with a new borough council, create relationships with all the schools in that borough. And let's be honest, the Sevenoaks borough is huge. It's over a vast space, and with working with the schools, all of a sudden they've increased their network, they've increased their potential to find new kids. They're going to have a state-of-the-art training facility, which is going to be better than taking them to Claremont Road and seeing porta cabins, because I think that, if you take your son to Leyton Orient or Arsenal and see the training facilities there and then take them to Millwall, you must be, unless you're a Millwall fan or you think realistically that your kid's going to get more game time at Millwall than he is at Arsenal or more chance of making it. I suppose if you look at the training facility we're moving out to that borough, that financially as a business opportunity makes a lot more sense after what you said.
Well, yeah, you've also, as much as these foundation phases of player development are in place, generally they're fed into through the community program. So, where at the moment it's all gathered around the Millwall ground, if you like, it spreads out from there. Once they get the Sevenoaks, then there's a second opportunity to have a second community program that actually, and it's going to cost money. And that's the thing. But community programs aren't as costly as academy programs or development programs, because a lot of it's self-generated funding, where you will do after school clubs for kids, and it could be you charge £1 or £2, whatever. It's worth the while for the parents to let their kids do it. Definitely worth a while for the club to pay coaches to go and do it, because you might just find that kid at 6 or 7 or 8 that is going to be the lifeblood of the club.
Do you think that's maybe the loophole, that Jim, that maybe these Premier League clubs look to expose maybe at times? Because I know, for example, there's Premier League clubs in London that are maybe perhaps based in West London, but they've got soccer schools in South East London right on the doorstep of where Millwall are, for example.
Definitely.
That's just a loophole, I guess, to kind of, especially with the hour commute thing, I guess if they're training at South East London, then it's not an issue really to grab them there and have a look at them in that side, I suppose. Well,
the one thing you don't ever get put into context is traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as they live within that hour, if you can, how far an hour? 50 miles, 60 miles, something like that. So if you live within that sort of circle, the likes of Tottenham, Arsenal, all them, they can do that, and they can put their soccer schools up. What's obviously it's in Millwall's interest, and I think Millwall were a great club for it, is, they are a name that's fashioned around the community. It's not the other way around where, everything is lovely and pretty. Millwall's a working class club that, encourages its support, and you would like to think that the community around it acknowledge that and don't get their heads turned by, an Arsenal soccer school setting up down the road. And there's always going to be kids that do it, but most of the kids that the club will be looking for wouldn't have their heads turned at that thing.
Because South East London is, within football circles, is a good scouting area, isn't it? There's been a lot of talent.
Well, a lot of talent. there's a guy just left Man City, or he's just leaving Man City. He's a head of youth there, or he's a head of academy recruitment for the whole of England or Britain or national, whatever. But he's from Croydon. But he recognised him, and he recognised that within South London or South East London, there's all these players. So he tapped into a club in South East London that was full of players, if you like. And by getting one of them, he got more and more and more. So, South East London is a hotbed of football. And if we miss any of them, it's not always the club's fault. It's because they're earmarked very early. To get nicked.
I mean, who was it? Bob Pearson. It was Bob Pearson, wasn't it? He used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, we interviewed Cherno a while ago, and Cherno was obviously an unbelievable player in his schoolboy days, and they ended up picking up 5 or 6 kids from their football team, plus their coach, because obviously that was the way that they'd done it. We and again from South East London, where kids were up and coming and going, and that was the way they thought of bringing the talent what they wanted, but at the same time by bringing in a coach to work with those kids, because he'd been working with them before and they were scoring goals like it was going out of fashion. And then I suppose you get the development stage where they start developing different, and then they start coming off the boil to a degree.
Yeah, well, funny enough with Cherno Sam, I watched him play for England schoolboys I think it was under 16 at the time, because I was at Chester City, or I lived close to Chester, and they were playing there. And he was a man amongst boys, in the game. And there was a crowd there, but there was a whole crowd of scouts looking, and Liverpool were obviously part of that deal. So, that they nicked him. But that's what I think South East London's always been a great place for footballers, but it's also saturated with scouting potential, if you like. All the clubs will have scouts around that area, and, it won't be Millwall's fault if they miss anybody. And I know it sounds a bit Irish, but it won't be their fault, because everybody else is after the same players.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Have you got anything else on youth, Omar? Because I wanted to get in with the director of football role he did at Hong Kong.
I just wanted to ask, obviously, about the challenges of, so for example, Millwall lost Sat Lovelace to Rangers in the summer when they're just gone. I wonder, obviously, it feels like the club are trying to stamp like an identity. There's obviously Matt Namara's come through, Billy Mitchell, Tyler Bury, Olafe's now getting a look in, for example, in the first team pre-season. How hard is it as a club, obviously, I guess in your position when you was obviously involved in youth development at Chester, to try and convince these players to stay when there's big boys kind of lurking around? It's just obviously it's a real challenge there, but it feels like it feels a bit underhand, I suppose, from us fans without knowing the details of what happened. But obviously he's gone to Rangers and the club have kind of put a statement out saying they're disappointed. But how hard is that to manage as in the position for a youth development head?
You're in no position. You're in no position to bargain, really, because the whip hand is with the player's parents. Was he 16?
Mm-hmm.
He's 16. Yeah. So the player's parents are the be all and end all of whether he goes and places like Rangers. He'll have an agent. So the bonuses won't be for him, if you like. The bonus will be going to in theory, a bigger club, better access to higher level football. Mm-hmm. But the reality is that he's an unknown quantity, so it's not costing them a lot of money. The agent's probably doing okay out of it. The parents might have had their heads turned by the whole thing, and it's a shame, because at the end of it, Millwall's losing a player who might have been something, but they might be losing a player who might not be anything.
I think his agent's his dad.
Is it? Well, there you go.
Yeah, his dad.
It's one of those things that you can't stop that.
No, his dad, I think, is a club promoter as well. So I think his dad is his agent as well. But it as a fan's point of view, it's a bit of a weird one. He's going from being on the verge of the Championship, where he could make it and then get spotted for the Premiership, to it looks from our point of view that he's going to the B team of Rangers, where in our eyes, I'd want to play Championship football or try to get into the Championship rather than look at playing B team. And I had this debate with a Scottish journalist where he said, yeah, but they were finalists of the Europa Cup, and it's like, Yeah, they were, but are they going to play him in the Europa Cup games? No, they're not. So technically, he's gone from Championship football to Mickey Mouse football in Scotland, in theory.
Yeah, I think, and that's all it is. It's theory, because he was, and looking from afar, really, he was fortunate. He got a chance at the right time. So he was in the right place at the right time to get that opportunity. He played 2 or 3 sort of bit parts in games. So I don't think anybody can actually say, he's the next big thing for us. He just happened to be the only player, or the next cab off the rank. If you want to look at players, I don't think anybody at Millwall will ever know unless he gets into the Rangers team. If he gets into the Rangers team, then they do a great bit of business. If he doesn't, and he's in their academy, because I don't think Rangers will trust a 16, 17, 18-year-old to go as a main striker for them. They'll go out and spend 10, 20 million or 10, 15 million on a certainty rather than a gamble, because they can't afford to cock it up, can they?
So what's the sort of tools maybe like an academy might use to quantify? Like obviously you've got under 18s, under 16s, under 15s, under 14s, and each group there'll be a couple players they deem to be the standout talents. But how would they quantify, like, this is the one to watch? Or is there metrics maybe that clubs might use to kind of keep an eye on these players? Or is there anything that they might compare them to kind of think this could be the one that could kind of go through? Because it's hard to obviously predict development from a young age. So what was the kind of challenges with that? And is there any tools that maybe academies might use that you can tell us about?
A lot of clubs will have exactly that. They'll have a template. They know what they're looking for. The great thing about academies is that they tend to do what they want to do, if you like, in terms of playing styles, what their coaches are coaching. So they're not overly influenced by the first team, unless the first team manager really wants to drive his personality all the way down. And then they tend to get the sack anyway after a year or two. So, the academies should stay doing what they're doing. But there'll be a template there. And what used to happen, I don't think it happens now, but you used to have a benchmark player. So you'd have your superstars who might perform 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, but only do it 2 or 3 times out of 8 games, 9 games. But you'll have benchmark players who are always 6, 7, 8 out of 10. On a good day, they're 8. On a bad day, they're 6, but they're still good. And you would gauge everything else above that benchmark. So if you were looking at a player to come into the academy, they would have to be better than your benchmark player. They wouldn't have to be better than the worst player. They'd have to be better than the benchmark player. And then in the series of assessment, it will be the bottom player will be the one to drop out, if that makes sense. So your benchmark gets lower and lower, but your quality gets higher and higher. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
But they would look at, and you know what? There's not a lot of difference between what you see in a footballer and what a club will see in a footballer. What they'll see are the other things. They won't see, or you won't see, what the kid's like sometimes, when he turns up, hasn't cleaned his boots, but he's in rag order and he's not really arsed, and all he wants to do is mess around. You don't see that part. You'll see the bit on a Saturday where he's going on the pitch, and he is playing decently well. But just imagine how well he could play if he screwed the nut and did everything he was asked to do.
How do you see those bits when you're going to a game to scout? You've been summoned to go to a Millwall Charlton game where they're playing the under 18s, and you've been told to look out for 2 kids. How do you find out the attitude, the personality of the kid from your short time there? Do you look to speak to the kid privately? Do you
No.
One, do they give you access to that? And 2,
No.
do you try and make friends with the parents to sort of
No.
do it outside? Or do you just go there to watch them play and go, actually, we need to look at this a bit more, and invite them to your ground where you can potentially interrogate them a bit better, I suppose?
Yeah, probably interrogating is not a great word, Mick, but I know what you mean.
Well, you know what I mean.
No, but what would happen is, and again, the process that I've been through over the last few years, you're given a name or 2 names to watch a game. I would get to the ground as early as so it might be an hour before the kickoff. So there, you'll watch the kids beforehand, so they're not even getting changed, or they're just making their way to the change rooms, and I might not even know who the kid is. So I'm just watching the group, and generally the best kids will stand out for one or two reasons. They'll either be fanning around, and being the big cheese of everything, or there'll be the kid who looks professional, who looks, like he's focused on what he's there to do. And then when they go out on the pitch, you can see to it. I could tell you, watching in a warm-up, if the player's got it, if he's focused on what he's there to do, if he's going to play to instruction, all the things that you're looking for as a professional scout or a professional person looking at a young player wanting to become a professional, it starts there. You look at the warm-up, you'll see what they're doing, you see what their attitude's like. You're also looking when they're having a drink or whatever, how they socialise with their teammates. Are they popular? Are they the kid who's slightly on his own for whatever reason? You then watch him during the game, and during the game you're seeing what everybody else is seeing. So, you're not seeing anything different. But then you'd watch them, how they walk off at half-time. You watch them, what's their attitude when they're losing? What's their attitude when they're winning? You then, at the end of the game, you might watch them again. If they've won and had a good win, are they a little bit too flashy about it? Or are they a bit more humble, if you like? They've won, but they do care, that everything's taken care of. And if they've lost, when they're losing during the game, what's their attitude like? And I think somebody like Billy Mitchell is a prime example of that, or Danny McNamara. When it gets a little bit tough and you are losing and it might be a bad day, I think players like that are the ones that you would look for, and you would actually look for the kid who fights back and wants, to get something out of the day, not just toss it off because they're losing, because some of the better players will toss it off.
I mean, one we've been speaking about on the show recently was with Bury, where he goes missing in little bits and pieces, where he's just not fully there yet, but you can see that there's definitely potential.
Bury, yeah, and Joe, and he's expected to do so much. He's a young player. He came in from Wimbledon as a known player, if you like. He came in, he's not held back as such, but he probably didn't force his way into it all. As soon as he got his chance last season, he sprung in and he looked fantastic. And I think that the emotional stress and the expectations on his shoulders suddenly sort of it owned to him, so he suddenly doesn't have that freedom. You can see he can score goals. That goal he scored last week, he can do that. It's the going missing bit in a side that works so hard. As much as you don't want it to happen, you've got to expect it of young players. And I think if he can keep doing what he's doing, it's at what point it all fits together for him. He went to Hartlepool, had a great time, because the expectations didn't outweigh the quality of the club. At Millwall, the expectations and the quality of the championship are a heavy burden, for young players, I think, especially when they expect to score goals.
Yeah, I mean, we saw him at Dartford, and there was a couple one-on-ones with the keeper where a proven player would possibly have taken his chance a little bit earlier, and you could see on his face, because obviously at Dartford you're very, very close, and you could see on his face that he took that one or two extra steps to try and put it onto the other foot, and you could physically see on his face that he knew that he'd missed his opportunity. Yeah. And I think that's the bit that if he can get that under control and make those shots earlier, like he did with the goal, from the left-hand side and just curled it in, he's got talent. He just needs to bring it into places, I suppose. That's
yeah, but there's also a responsibility on the coaches. The coaches there have a responsibility to not overburden him, let him play with a bit of freedom, because when he came in and he didn't have that expectation, he did fantastically well. If he's getting it all on himself, then the coach has got to talk to him, the manager's got to talk to him, whether they have a psychologist turning up at the club, whatever. Little things, it's those little details, and it could be one conversation might be the making of him, rather than listen to some fan on the side giving him down the banks, and it might break him a little bit, and if you're getting broken every 10 minutes for half a season, it's not going to do you any good, is it?
So with that challenge, obviously, what you're saying about the manager putting pressure, or not pressure, or giving them the opportunity to play. I suppose that's the catch-22 of professional football, isn't it? Because the manager might want to give these players a chance, but then he might not have the patience or might not have the time afforded to him by the club. So it's really like I feel like the club at Millwall are trying to shift towards the youth development at the moment and try and stamp their identity on the club. But it's not a luxury that all managers get to have, do they? I feel like in professional football, especially the higher leagues, so to speak.
Well, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
Everybody wants their young players to come through and be seen. And when they're seen, if the manager puts them in and they don't get the 3 points or they don't get the results, suddenly they don't look at the players. They'll just get back to the manager. Now, again, funding. I think this year, I listened to a show you did the other day, and you know, I think it's a real good feeling about this year's transfer market. You know, leading up to the season. At the moment, but we've been there before, haven't we? You know, everybody's happy at the moment. Everybody's seeing it as a big positive. So, youth development, if he brings Toffolo John and, you know, Danny McNamara, Billy Mitchell, Isaac Alofi, if they all suddenly have got 4 players all through the Millwall system, Bury gets in there, we're all happy until the results go tits up, and then everybody sort of starts looking at Gary Rowett as being the problem. Because this year he's had a bit of funding. So this year, when you're looking at the squad, those, I think, Alofi, Topolodge, they might just be squad players who might go on loan. But when your squad's so strong, I suppose, or the depth of it is getting bigger and bigger, if it's Shackleton comes in as well, suddenly that squad is looking a lot more stronger than it did last year. And the likes of Bury even getting a game, you know, to start is going to be difficult. So when he does get on, that's where the manager can do his stuff beforehand, you know, and promise him or give him some indication that if he does well, he'll be part of the deal, you know. And if he does well, then he should be. But if he doesn't, you can't blame anybody else. If everything else is in play for him or for the other young lads, they can't blame anybody themselves at the end of the day for not performing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I'd like to kick in because it's something what we've discussed on the shows a lot, and obviously Aldo coming back into a director of football role. Something what Omar's raised, and we both raised it numerous times. We felt that Millwall, for a good while, we were replacing managers, and basically you had Lomas go out, buy a load of players, get sacked. Those players don't fit into the next manager's line. So he's then got to get rid of those players, buy in his players. Then again, he gets sacked, and then they're lumped onto another manager. And again, they're not their type of player. So in a role you did as director of football, how does that change from it being a manager's decision of what players he buys to you? I take it with a director of football, you then decide what style of football you're going to be playing and what sort of players you're going to look at for that chosen style of football. Is that how it works, or is it slightly different to that?
I think times have changed now, Mick. What happens now within clubs, and I think Aldo's title, I think, is something like operations of football director, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's slightly away from the just football side of things. I think he's also looking at other things. But what would tend to happen, and a director of football now is seen as not a requirement, but it's seen as a positive thing within clubs. Up until 2 seasons ago, people didn't like him. They didn't want to get anything from him. But now the directors of football, they will tend to take away the first team, if you like. Then everything below that, maybe the under-23s, under-21s will still sort of tap in with the first team. But everything under that will be through the director of football and the academy manager. That's how it tends to work. And how they play, systems they play, the coaches, programs, whether they get psychologists in, their strength and condition, everything tends to come then from the director of football downwards, or technical director, what you want to call them. So for me, it's a good thing, because it means that if they do get rid of the manager, it means that a new manager can come in, he can impact his style on the first team, and even the under 21s or 23s. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't impact any further down. So the kid at 16 or 17 gets bombed out because he can't adapt to another way of playing when he's been playing that way for 10 years, getting up to where it is.
I think
it's an unfair process, really, sometimes.
It's a big thing for me as well, because I think, obviously, even just to this summer, like, we've got rid of the contracts in the last half year was Bud Fardson, Matt Smith, Connor Mahoney, these players that were on the contracts that Harris offered to these players. And then eventually Rowett's been able to move them out and then get new players in. And that's why we're seeing maybe the return of investment as well, because I think a few of them would have been big hitters, even same with Alex Pearce as such as well. So like it is, I think it's a good step in the right direction, I suppose, but it's quite it's sort of, like you say, with director of football or the director of operations of football, it's hard to kind of understand what they fully do, I suppose, because it can be different, I suppose, from club to club, I guess, Jim.
And it is. Every club has its own, if you like, style or process of doing things. And again, I don't know Millwall well enough, behind the scenes to know what he's doing. But, if they're bringing in the players they're bringing in, then somebody's doing a decent job. Yeah. Because, Fleming, Honeyman, all good players. The two lads from Leeds, two good players. For me, somebody's doing it right. And if he's got his hand on the first team recruitment, if you like, but he's also got a handle with the academy and what's going on there, then it can't be a bad thing. It's up to him to prove himself, I suppose, over time. But at the same time, I think the club's going in the right direction. Other clubs do it totally different. Other clubs may do, their technical director might be the best mate of the manager. You know what I mean? And he'll say, right, this is what I want you to do. And he'll go and do it. But the academy manager will be left alone, to sink or swim with what goes on there. So every club's different. But I think Millwall, going down the road they are and looking at the signings they brought in, is a good thing.
Do you think that potentially the last few years, Millwall, without having that position, were pretty much too ingrained to whatever manager was there? Because obviously they potentially had control all the way down that bracket and they can inflict their way down. Because I think Harris, with Scott Fitzgerald and everyone else, had interest in, the youth players as such going down that chart. Probably Holloway the same. I think it's probably where now it's Rowett's probably looking more at first and under 23s rather than the whole system.
Yeah, well, the trouble is, I can't say it's trouble, but managers in the past, not just Millwall, managers everywhere have always been kings of the castle, haven't they? Everything in front of them. If they're the manager of the club, they're the manager of the club all the way down. I think the foreign managers coming in who don't have that burden, they see themselves as head coaches for the first team. Yeah. And they'll cherry pick the best of what's underneath from there. And if they haven't got what they want, they'll go out and buy another one. So I think Gary Rowett is made do, if you like, with a squad of players that weren't all his. He's brought some in to fill gaps. He's brought some in that were required at the time. But I think now he's got to the point where, having released some of the players he's released, it's opened up funding, I suppose, to allow the players he's brought in to come in. And I don't think he's that too bad. I think he trusts the academy manager, trusts Aldo, if you like, so that if there is an under 16, under 17 that's on fire, they'll get their chance with the first team. And again, back to the training ground, Mick, if that training ground is going to be with the first team and the academy, and the youth, and that, what a great environment then. So suddenly you're watching an under 17, maybe an under 16, who's doing really well, going over training with the first team, just to have a look at him without the whole rigmarole of changing sites and everything that goes with it. So I think Rowett's in a good position. I think appointing Aldo is a good thing. And I think, the academy can only get stronger with the move.
What would you do? What would be your style? A curveball for you to a degree, but what would be your style of play as such? What you would bring in if you were Millwall's director of football? Then,
if it was me, it's funny because when I first started, I used to work at Wrexham years ago when Brian Flynn was the manager, and I worked in the academy there. And they had a fantastic system of developing young players, and it was all built on 4-3-3. It wasn't 4-4-2, and the whole process they had was about developing the whole player, if that makes sense. And that's before all modern football come along. So for me, I like 5 at the back. I like 2 centre backs who can pick up opposition strikers, if you like, or a striker and a deep line striker. If they're picked up, then you've got 3 good footballers. If you've got a footballing centre back, he can be the sweeper. What used to be a sweeper, it can be a front sweeper now, however you want to put it. And 2 good wing backs, and you always go on the front foot, in my mind. And then I like the likes of Honeyman. I like Terry Urlock. Different types of players, but anybody who's got that sort of drive in them will be good. I liked George Saville when he was here before. He's come back and he's playing a different role. I like Ryan Leonard. So for me, they're the sort of players I'd have. I think that I'm probably no different to a lot of people who look at Millwall. I think we're actually quite solid, defensively. We might have an off day here and there, but we're not too bad. I think that the biggest problem that Gary Rowett's got, and I think possibly looking on from the outside, is what they do with the front 3, whether they play him as a 1 and a 2, whether they play him as a 2 wide players and a striker. It's a different. You can have 2 10s if you like, and a striker. So I think his biggest job is getting a firing strike force that can do it. I watched the game last year against Reading. I brought my missus down to London. We went to the Reading game, and that's the first time I've seen Bennett up close. And I thought he was fantastic. I think he come on for the second half, and he was absolutely fantastic. But then you don't get that every week, do you? Because he gets injured and he might not be for a week. But if they get Bennett firing, they could get Bradshaw, who I think is a good striker, if you like. Get Afobe there, get Bury there. Who else is there? There's going to be somebody else who could be thrown in there, Fleming. Then suddenly, I think if he can get any 3 of them 5 or 6 firing, then I think that would suit me at Millwall. So I think the rest of it takes care of it. So I think Leonard will, if you like, cover McNamara. I think the other side, you got Murray Wallace covering Scott Malone, and if Shackleton comes in, he can do both sides. So I think we're strong all the way through. I think the centre midfield looks fantastic. If Fleming can play as a centre midfielder alongside Honeyman, alongside Billy Mitchell, alongside Saville, that group is all right. But I think it's that front area that I would look to. We've got a focal point in Afobe, but it's just which Afobe turns up. I think sometimes, I'm no different than anybody else. I think.
Yeah, I think the issue we've got, and I think also hopefully it's how it works out. I feel like it's started to see it in pre-season as well. Like I think we're changing the way we go from back to front a little bit. It used to be in the past kind of direct, kind of looking to play on the counter attack. But when you get the likes of Creswell in at the back, you're getting obviously Honeyman in midfield as well. And Fleming as well. I think hopefully we'll start to see maybe more playing through the thirds, maybe perhaps, and maybe that's something that maybe Router might be trying to do. But I agree with you on Bennett as well. I think the frustration with Bennett for me was he has 2 or 3 good games, gets a knock, and then you don't see him for 2 or 3 games, and it takes him a while to get up to speed again. And it's like it's frustrating, but I think it's something that he's had through his whole career, hasn't he? I suppose at Derby.
Well, yeah, but he's still young, isn't he? I think he's only 26, 27 now, isn't he? He's not an old player. So I think, and the more competition there is amongst them, the more they've got to fire, haven't they? I think Fleming's an interesting one because he can play a centre midfield role. He can play as a 10. He can play as a second striker. And I think he might be the competition for all of them. I think he can be shifted around if necessary. I think if Bury can get going, then I think we've got a diamond there, haven't we? If he can replace, what we had on the right-hand side. But I think 5 of them, if any 3 can do it, then hopefully they will.
With the youth we've got now, just to finish up, would you keep them within the main squad and try and develop them that way, or would you think of putting them out for another season before bringing them up?
I think putting them out for a season, it's a slightly difficult one because we got caught last year, didn't we, where we had players out and they couldn't get recalled, or they got injured out there. So for me, I'd probably let them go for half a season. If they're not going to start, we've got, October, November where the World Cup starts? Yeah. If they're not going to be part of the starting groups, if you like, or the substitute bench, I'd let them go till then. Let them go out on loan to League One, League Two, whatever works, and then reassessing things. I not talking about the likes of Alex Mitchell. He's had a season at Orient. Suppose he's done fantastically well. Comes back, and obviously his pathway through now has been blocked by Cresswell coming in. But nobody's moaning about it. Alex Mitchell's probably moaning, but he won't want to sort of be sat there doing nothing, having had a season of proper football. So, he might be one that goes till Christmas and then reassess him.
Excellent news. Well, I think on there we're gonna bring this to the end. It would be rude if I didn't ask you why you're on, Jim. What's your prediction for this season? Where do you think Millwall's gonna finish? And the other one is, I'd like a prediction of who you think player of the season will be as well, and then we can come back to it at a later point and see where it is. So yeah, two predictions for you. Let's put it right on you.
Right, well, at this point, looking at it, and I think if Shackleton comes in and possibly a left-sided player anyway, I'd put us in playoffs. If we're not in the playoffs, we've got to be close to it. It's going to be maybe 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, that sort of area. And, it would be a travesty now, I think, having got what we've got within the squad, if it didn't succeed. So I think we've had a little bit of time, to get used to Gary Rowett. He seems to understand what's required now. And he's playing his own hand now. He can't be looking at, previous squads that he's inherited. He's doing his own dealings now. So I think 5th, 6th, 7th, somewhere around there. So that's 3 choices there. And player of the season, I think.
Who do you think to stand out for this season? I know we've only had 3 pre-seasons games as such, and bits and pieces. But I mean, who do you think's definitely one who looks mustard for this season?
I think already. I think you'd look at Honeyman being there, wouldn't you? But definitely. And I don't know. I think it could be Cresswell. I think he's a sort of player. He's high quality anyway, and to come into a championship team, he looks level-headed. He looks like he'll fit in with the group, and he looks like he'll do a role at the back. That if he starts pushing him forward with the ball, he might just stand out, and he might open up doors that we never unlocked here for years. So I think Cresswell could be the one.
Nice, good shout. I like that.
There we go. So
look over to that.
I said last night on the show we did last night. I said Honeyman. I think
I said Honeyman as well a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so I'm with you. I think
definitely Honeyman there. But we're waiting to see. I mean, we've got some good players coming in. Shackleton and Cresswell working together can only be a good thing. And with having Fleming and all that, I agree with what you said. I think this is Rowett's year to make or break. Either it's his team, either he can do it or he can't. And he's obviously signed an extension. But I think for the first time in a while, we've said on the show, it's a very exciting time.
Being
a
very positive. Yeah, I think
that's it.
As soon as he pulled them players in, I think everybody got a lift, didn't they? Everybody sat up a little bit, realised that there is life after Jed, and on we go. I'm really looking forward to it now. It's only 2 weeks away, isn't it? So everybody's rubbing their hands.
No, that's it. Well, thanks very much for giving up your time tonight, Jim. It was a cracking insight, to be fair, and no doubt we'll probably get questions based on this, and we'll have to come back to it at some point throughout the season, maybe, with some of those questions. But no, Omar, anything else before we end?
No, all good. Thank you, Jim, for coming on. It's been a great chat.
No, it's been lovely meeting you, lads, and I listen to the podcast all the time, so yeah, I sort of know you, but I don't know you.
Brilliant.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I'm the good-looking one. Don't worry about that one. So, yeah. Right, you've been listening to that Millwall podcast where we've been asking a Premiership scout or an ex-Premiership scout some questions. Hopefully, you've enjoyed the show. If you've got any comments regarding it, drop us a DM or email us at info@thatmillwallpodcast.co.uk. Make sure you follow all our socials and carry on listening. Thank you very much. See you again shortly. Bye.